Today, we will be talking about gaseous exchange. To give the discussion of this topic a more structured approach, I decided to split this topic into 3 parts. In this first part, I will discuss how oxygen enters from the surrounding air into our blood and how carbon dioxide is expelled from our blood to the external environment. In the second part, I will then go into the features of gas exchange you will have to know before ending off with the last part, which discusses how gases are transported in blood as well as the adaptations the body has to facilitate this. So let's begin with the video. Gas exchange occurs at the alveoli of our lungs, an organ that is housed within the thoracic cavity as depicted here. Within the thoracic cavity, the lung is protected as well as given the space to expand and contract with the aid of muscles such as the intercostal muscles that runs between the ribs as shown here. To understand how gases are exchanged between air and our blood, we first need to understand how air gets into our lungs in the first place. This is done through breathing, which consists of inhalation and exhalation. To inhale air into our lungs, multiple muscles work together to create pressure differences that facilitates air movement. The creation of pressure differences, and this is the important thing to note, makes up the basis of breathing. During inhalation, diaphragm muscles contract, causing the diaphragm to flatten in this direction. External intercostal muscles of the ribs contract while its internal counterpart relaxes, causing the ribs and the sternum to move upward and outward in this direction. This is an example of an antagonistic muscle pair working in unison. The result of these muscle actions is the increase in the volume of the thoracic cavity, creating a region of low air pressure with respect to the atmospheric air outside the body. Due to the higher atmospheric pressure of the external air, air then naturally rushes into the lungs, perfusing alveoli with air. During exhalation, the opposite essentially occurs. The diaphragm muscle relaxes and the internal intercostal muscles contract while its antagonistic pair relaxes. This causes a decrease in volume of the thoracic cavity, now creating a region of higher air pressure in the lungs. Due to the difference in pressure in the lungs compared to the surrounding air, air from the lungs are forced out. And thus, these two processes occur in step, making up what we experience as breathing. One fun fact to know about breathing is that it is not the need for oxygen that stimulates breathing, but rather the need to expel carbon dioxide from the blood. This was something that I did not know previously, so I thought it would be fun to point it out. Some additional features to take note of are the presence of C-shaped cartilage along the entire length of the trachea. The trachea, also known as the windpipe, is the tube that connects the nasal cavity to the lungs, and is a pathway in which air travels to get in and out of the lung. The presence of C-shaped cartilage is an adaptive feature to ensure that the trachea is constantly kept open to facilitate gaseous exchange. Now, we move on to the actual exchange of gases. We just talked about how air enters into the alveoli of our lungs and how air in the alveoli gets expelled. But how about what actually takes place in the alveoli? Alveoli are highly perfused by blood vessels, which allows for the efficient movement of oxygen from inhaled air into the blood, and carbon dioxide from the blood into the alveoli for exhalation. The process in which gases move between these two spaces is by simple diffusion. There is a film of moisture that lines the alveolus for gases to dissolve in. It is in this film that oxygen dissolves before moving down the concentration gradient into blood. The same thing happens for carbon dioxide, which moves down its concentration gradient out of blood before being released into the air spaces of the alveolus for expiration. At this singular alveolar unit, we can also appreciate the adaptations present that increases the efficiency of gas exchange. Firstly, we have the film of moisture, which was just discussed. Secondly, the alveoli are richly perfused with many capillaries to ensure a maximum rate of exchange. Thirdly, the cellular walls of capillaries and alveoli are very thin to allow for quick diffusion. Fourthly, the concentration gradients of oxygen and carbon dioxide are always maintained to ensure that diffusion keeps going. The concentration gradients are maintained by constant breathing as well as blood flow that brings oxygenated blood out of the lungs and deoxygenated blood in. Lastly, alveoli have a large surface area to volume ratio to maximize the surface area available for gaseous exchange. This is achieved by partition walls, which gives each alveolus its own compartment of sorts. It is here that we can also see and understand the damaging effects of smoking, which reduces the surface area available for gaseous exchange. This leads to low oxygen blood concentrations as well as laboured breathing in smokers. What I've just described are the 5 adaptive features of the alveolus which facilitate gaseous exchange. This is something that is commonly tested in your exams, so be sure to be familiar with all 5. Okay, so now gases have been exchanged from the air spaces of the alveolus into blood. What next? These gases then need to be transported within the blood to go to where they need to go. So let's begin with oxygen. While some oxygen remains dissolved in blood, the majority of oxygen gets carried by hemoglobin in red blood cells. And when I mean carried, I mean that it forms oxyhemoglobin in red blood cells, with each hemoglobin molecule being able to bind to 4 molecules of oxygen. In this way, oxygen gets carried by the blood to oxygen-demanding tissues, where oxygen dissociates from hemoglobin before diffusing down its concentration gradient to supply tissues with oxygen. Cells use oxygen for respiration, releasing carbon dioxide as a result. You can check out my mind map on respiration if you want to find out more on this. Carbon dioxide produced is a toxic waste product that has to be removed from our blood and tissues. Firstly, carbon dioxide diffuses down its concentration gradient from the tissue into blood. However, carbon dioxide cannot exist as is in blood due to its acidic nature. Therefore, it gets converted to bicarbonate ions by means of an enzymatic pathway, which then gets transported along in plasma. This process occurs within red blood cells as well, with a chloride shift occurring to ensure the maintenance of charge in both the cell and in the blood. When deoxygenated blood reaches the lungs, bicarbonate ions re-enter red blood cells, where it undergoes a reversing enzymatic reaction to reform carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide then diffuses from blood into the alveolus to be expelled as described here. In this way, oxygen gets into the blood to be transported all over the body to tissues and cells. Waste carbon dioxide from respiration is then picked up from tissues all over the body to be transported back to the lungs for exhalation out of the body. So this brings us to the end of the first part on the mechanisms of breathing and the exchange of gases. Do click on this link to see my next part on the features of gaseous exchange you will need to know. Anyways, I hope you found this video useful and have a good day.